Hey, good morning, everybody. This is Jason Weller with the Michigan Coalition Against Homelessness. We are here today to learn about the Ending Homelessness in Michigan annual report, aka the Statewide Data Report. And we are joined by Jerry Leslie, aka Mr. HMIS himself. So Jerry is going to walk us through the highlights from the data report from last year and hopefully help everybody get a better understanding of what exactly is in the report itself. And then we're going to end with talking about some things to think about as we move into November and folks have awareness raising events, whether it's for Homeless Awareness Month or the National Hunger and Homelessness Awareness Week campaign, whatever thing you're subscribing to. Just making sure you've got some talking points and some things to think about as you're engaging with policymakers and media and members of the general public. So, Jerry, would you like to say hi to everybody?
Hello, everybody. How are you doing?
And of course, that's a loaded question because everybody's
That
on mute.
they're not going to respond back to me, but with a
Yeah,
rhetorical question this morning. But
yeah,
I can hear all of you enthusiastic about seeing data this morning. So that
yeah.
part of it, yep, we're good.
So that's actually a good segue into some ground rules or housekeeping stuff for how we have the webinar set up. We are expecting anywhere 40 to 50 people. This historically is one of our larger webinars every year. Um, so we got about 20 plus people on already, and I'm expecting we'll have some more folks join us here in the next few minutes. But in terms of ground rules, if you are unfamiliar with GoToWebinar, there's a little toolbox on the right-hand side of your screen. Got a couple of things there. It's got questions and handouts. So there are two handouts. There's the slide deck that Jerry and I will be walking through this morning. And then there's also the actual PDF of the annual report. This is the one time ever, one time a year when we do this webinar, where we strongly encourage you to actually download the report over the slide deck. But every year we've done this presentation, we get a ton of requests afterwards for the slide deck because folks want to look at that as opposed to the report itself. So you've got both. You're welcome to download it. I will send out both electronically after the webinar. So if you, for whatever reason, you have a slow connection, whatever it is, but you're having problems downloading, then I will make sure that the resources are available afterwards. The other thing, so questions. Jerry is going to cover a lot of territory because the report's 20 pages. It is packed full of stuff. So if you have a detailed or clarifying question as Jerry's talking, please put that in and I'll be monitoring those and I'll slide that into, I'll ask Jerry that question as soon as I get a chance. If you ask a big overarching question, I might acknowledge it, I might not, but typically we hold those until the very end so we can have kind of a broader conversation about those types of things. So
I
just
was going to say,
FYI.
be careful with those big overarching questions because I don't have quite the mental capacity to answer those. Jason will have to take responsibility on those.
Oh no, yeah, then everybody's in for a bad, yeah, that's not for anybody. But sure. Yeah, so we also apologize. Jerry and I have had a bit of a hectic week, so we may also be a little punchy today. So,
Yes.
yeah, yeah, which is a good and bad thing because hey, we're high energy, but on the other hand, you're not quite sure where we're gonna go.
Hmm.
We were debating before we went live which Beastie Boys song we should open with, but it got too logistically difficult to figure that out. So Jerry may actually bust out into some Beastie Boys lyrics at some point in the webinar today. Bonus points for you because he's got some mad skills. So all right, before before we actually get started, we got a couple of poll questions, and this will help Jerry and I kind of understand where folks are at with their engagement with the report and data in general. So let's start with the basic, um, which is, have you had a chance to actually look at the report? So, spoiler alert, I mean, we had hard copies of it at the summit a few weeks ago. I know we shared it electronically via social media, and via email blast. But just because it's out there doesn't mean that folks have actually had a chance to engage with it. So this will give us a sense of, in some areas, how much detail we might need to go into versus things we can kind of gloss over. So we got a fair number of folks weigh in already, but I'll probably give you another 5 seconds. We got almost 3/4 of you have weighed in. So, all right, here we go. So 41% is a definitive yes, 41% definitive no, and 18% define read. Well, there you go, Jared.
Well, that one, well, we had to work on that one a little bit. So.
Yeah. So I would say we're almost 2/3 in the realm of probably haven't looked at it in great detail, which is helpful for us. Okay, so next question. And the last 12 months, your organization or COC, local planning body, whatever level you're at, has shared data with what groups? And folks needed to think about this one.
Well, I was gonna say you probably should have put like your husband and wife or family or children or something at home too, because I'm sure some of you have done that on many occasions. I can speak from experience, and my family, my wife sometimes goes, "Do I really have to listen to you talk about that again?"
Right. Yeah, I maybe that falls under the other category, significant other. Yeah, spouse.
Significant other, yes, right.
Yeah, with me it would be children. I mean, the children might also be a possibility where they're just getting lectures.
Well, Jason, we should have your children doing this presentation then, I would think. Might give a better job than we would here. So.
Yeah, I mean, after this week, maybe. So, folks are. Oh wow. Okay, so this is actually, you guys are a pretty engaged group. I'm liking this. So, slightly over half of you policymakers, or rather at the local, state, or federal level. That's pretty good. Over 50% members of the media. Again, that's pretty solid. 70% funders, which I mean makes total sense. I mean, this data is teed up for you and ready to be used for grant applications and the such. 65% general public. So, yeah, this is pretty awesome. Kind of intrigued about that 20% other, but yeah, we don't have time to dig into that today. And then one last question, just so we kind of get a sense of what other data sources you're looking at. And again, this is a question we ask every year just to kind of see like what's hot and what's on the top of people's minds as we're talking about data. And we figured this, you're interested in data, obviously you're here. So you're a good group to use, or a good group to ask, kind of using you as a focus group. And I understand the other category on this question gets difficult because GoToWebinar is limited. We can't ask you what the other category is, but especially since we just did a webinar back in August with the Michigan Association of United Ways and Ottawa United Way on the ALICE report. We know that we got a lot of folks turning out for that, and following up afterwards asking for some more information. So this one, wow. So folks are actually being much slower to respond to this one. And I don't know if that's because you're thinking things through or you're already multitasking and answering a phone call while trying to pay attention to this, but it's been over a minute. So let's go ahead and share the results for this. So not surprisingly, almost a half of you are using the United Way ALICE report. That was the sense we got at the webinar a couple months ago, that folks in our sector are paying attention to it. The Kids Count report through the Michigan League for Public Policy, only 13% of you have used that. 19% census data, so that's actually a little surprising as well because that feels low. Prosperity Now scorecard, 6%, and then other is 19. And I suspect NLIHC's gap and out of reach reports probably fall into that other category. We're just limited with what all we can ask here. It's one downside to GoToWebinar, but thank you. It gives us a sense of kind of how engaged you are with your data. So let me hide that. And then Jerry, I think that's it for the poll questions. We're ready to get started.
Well, let's do this. And Jason, you called me Mr. HMIS. I'm sure there's some other four-letter acronym words that people probably prefer to use on some occasions, but we'll leave those till after the webinar.
Right.
So let's get started with this. So first of all, the question is, why do an annual report? So we want to talk this through a little bit. Well, for the big thing about an annual report is that it grounds all the work you do in reality. So many times I hear the statement being made that HMIS is a black box, that we put information into it, we send it out for our federal or state funders, but it feels like we're just putting information in for no purpose other than reporting out to required funders. Well, the reality of it is, so from a statewide perspective, this data is incredibly valuable. This data is something that actually drives process change. It drives additional resources. It's something that, again, Micah, our team, in conjunction with DHHS and MISTA, Salvation Army, the United Ways, the other state partners, we actually use this data for purposes of going out and advocating for the work you do and helping to bring additional resources to the table. So this really helps us to paint a picture and inform those people who are critical stakeholders and decision makers on the importance of work around homelessness and what the needs are that need to be addressed within the work that we're doing. Again, that ties directly into the supporting the management of resources. Also, we do use this report and this data to support performance improvement. So at the end of the day, we know that our goal here in the work that we do is to prevent and end homelessness for people who are in our communities and in the state of Michigan. So the way we look at that is looking at system performance measures and other performance metrics. And this data drives those initiatives that we have to come up with what are some of the best practices across the state and how can we spread those out in such a way that they're implemented in various places. And we're seeing our clients have greater success in finding permanent housing and then not returning to homelessness after they leave our homeless service delivery coordinated systems of care. So that is really the key that we have there. But the big thing that we've got to remind you of is this data is only as useful as to the degree it's used. So if data is something that you get it, you take a look at it and you say, that's nice, and you put it on the shelf, and then you just go back to doing what you do every day, and it sits there for the next 12 months, that data is not going to be useful. But when you take that data, you inform stakeholders in the media and the public about what is happening around the work to end homelessness in your local COC. And of course, we do it at a state level. And then you also use it to advocate for additional resources and system change. That report becomes a driving tool to improve the work that we're doing. So go ahead, Jason, we'll move to the next slide. So where do these numbers come from? As you all know, these numbers do come based from the HMIS largely, although there are a couple other sources and a couple other places that are used for the report. And what we found is that last year there were 65,104 people who were literally homeless, again, meeting that category 1 definition of homelessness at some point during the calendar year of 2018. The question often comes down to, well, how do you figure that out? Well, what we do is we actually have what we call a coverage rate. So we know in HMIS last year that 58,046 people were entered into the HMIS who were listed as literally homeless during the calendar year of 2018. How do we do the 7,058 number? Well, what we do is we work with the communities across the state in all of our, of course, 21 COCs in Michigan. Of the local planning bodies, I believe we have 39 in the balance of state. And what we do every year is we do a coverage exercise. And it basically is an exercise to determine what is the percentage of persons who are homeless in your community that actually touch the HMIS, and what are the percentage of persons who are in your community who may engage with other service providers and never make their way into, let's say, emergency shelter and coordinated entry, street outreach, some of your other direct homeless service providing programs and agencies. And based on that, of course, it could be that they're touching DV, it could be that they're touching a number of other programs that you're using in your COC. Based on that, we create a coverage ratio, which is basically a multiplier factor out on that, and then we are able from that ratio to determine how many people are estimated to be Category 1 across the state during the year. Now, here's a critical one. The PIT count, we often ask the question, well, what's the difference between this count, the annual count report, and the PIT count that we do every January? Well, it's actually a pretty simple explanation. What it is the PIT count is the count of the number of persons who are homeless within your community on one specific night of the year. So you'll take one specific night, you count everybody who's Category 1, literally homeless in your community, and that becomes your PIT count. What the annual count is we say, okay, let's take a look at all the people who are homeless on that one night of the year. Let's add the other 364 nights out of the year, and we're going to see how many people were experiencing literal homeless situations during a full calendar year. So the PIT count, the best way to think about it is a subset. It's just looking at who's homeless on one night. The annual count is saying between January 1st, 2018 and December 31st, 2018, how many people were identified to be literally homeless at some point during that calendar year. So let's take a look at the numbers and see what we have. So first of all, if you look at this, this is going to be the comparison of the regions across the state of Michigan and seeing where we are seeing what numbers happening. So, excuse me. If you take a look at this on this chart, you will see over the course of 2016 to 2018, you are going to see all the numbers of persons who are experiencing homelessness in the graph there over the course of these 3-year periods. And if you look at the very bottom of that, it is going to represent what amount of change we have seen within these populations within each of the state regions. And of course, these are based on the state prosperity regions which are identified by the state of Michigan. And we're able to take a look at the percent change that we're seeing across that period of time. So for example, if you're looking at Region 1, you're seeing, again, a 14% increase. Looking at Region 10, which would be Detroit, Wayne County, of course, Macomb County, and Oakland County, you're going to be seeing a 11% drop. Also, in the graphs themselves, you're going to see the numbers of persons experiencing homelessness during the 2018 calendar year, and the percent there next to it is going to be the percentage makeup of the total number of persons homeless within the entire state for that number. So for example, here, Region 10, we make up about 26% of the total persons experiencing homelessness within the state. Region 6 would be 7%, which is going to be largely the Thumb, Flint, Genesee County, and Lapeer County area, and so on. So this gives you a breakdown of where homelessness is occurring in the state from a regional perspective and helps you to understand better how homelessness is changing throughout that point in time. So what do we know about the subpopulations? Let's take a look at them. So first of all, what we know about families, we're going to say some things. Number one, the numbers in Michigan have largely remained consistent. They increased a little bit from 2017 to 2018. It really is a very minor increase, but one thing that we can say right now, and this is something to pay close attention to, that families make up over half of that population. And the fact of the matter is, families are one of our subpopulation groups that have actually grown over the past calendar year. So looking at the data, we know that families are composed of primarily young women, obviously average age of 33 with 1.4 children, which has the average age of 7. And then, of course, 61% of adults in the household, as you might expect, are going to be ages 18 to 34, with the 75% of them being female. Although, as many of you may know, that we are seeing increases in the number of male households that are male household header, where males are going and identifying, presenting themselves with children. But again, it's a very small percentage compared to the overall number, which are largely led by female head of households. So when they exit projects, their average income is going to be about 649, which isn't in the higher end, but it is, it's better than some of the other categories. However, it's still, when you begin to think about some of the challenges that families face around both rent and utilities, around if you have a working mother, single mother, child care, among providing for doctor's visits and healthcare, 649 does not go very far. And so that's one critical thing to think in mind as you're presenting this report, that $649 a month is not necessarily a livable wage, which is something that you can sustain from. Also, 37% of parents have a long-term disability, with about 64% of those with long-term disabilities having a mental illness, and 39% of them having some form of a physical disability. Now, one thing that is going to be very important to pay attention to, and there's going to be a lot of work we're doing on this from a statewide perspective moving forward, but if you look at our persons and families, 51% of adults and 61% of children are African American. One thing that we see across the state of Michigan is there is a tremendous racial inequity lens when it comes to persons experiencing homelessness, particularly with those who identify as Black or African American. Well, I believe, and Jason, correct me if I'm wrong, that the census data is 14% of the population of the state of Michigan are Black or African American. One of the things we see is that about just over 50%, about 53% of persons who are experiencing literal homelessness at some point in the year are Black or African American. And what is even more concerning, as we go up into the higher acuity or the longer staying population, such as those who are chronically homeless, that number jumps to almost 59%. So we know that category one homelessness, literal homelessness, length of time homelessness, discharge to positive destinations is much more difficult for those who are Black or African American to make it through. Their performance numbers are lower in general than other racial counterparts. And of course, the homelessness affects them disproportionately at a higher rate, as according to the general population.
So real quick, Jerry, you are correct. The African American population, according to the census, is 14% of the overall population here in Michigan. So yeah, your numbers are right on.
Very good. I just want to make sure when I said that I was popping off the
Yeah,
top of my
yeah,
head.
no,
Yep.
you got it.
And then 11% of children have a disability, primarily a developmental disability that affects them. And again, remember that just because it is not the adult with a disability, children with a disability also has a tremendous impact on the household, because oftentimes those children who have disability require additional care and additional support. And when you have a family in crisis, number one, family working to make ends meet, often the resources and the time are not there to really adequately address those disabilities. So children with disabilities have just as much of an impact on a household as an adult with a disability would, because of the fact that it does take, again, proper attention and care to that disability to make sure that that child is growing up in a healthy environment. So jumping to single adults. So we know that the single adult population is typically going to be older than the family population. First of all, we define single adults as being 25 plus. As many of you know, we'll talk about this in just a minute. There are two youth categories that we work with. We look at under 18, which would be what we call minors who are youth. And then we have the category which is 18 to 24, which will be adult youth. Those are both considered to be youth categories. So that's why the single population is looked at as those adults who are over the age of 25. So what we know is that, number one, the average age is 46, is an older population, while 66, or approximately 2/3 of the population, are males. 24% of them are going to be the age of 25 to 34. We're going to see 48% of them are going to fall within that. Basically, half of them are going to fall within that middle 10-year span of 35 to 54. And then about 28% of our persons experiencing homelessness are going to be over the age of 5. And we will be talking about that one a little bit later. One thing you'll see here, again, average monthly income at exit is a little bit higher than families, so it's 705. We have about 2/3 of the persons here in this category of single adults having long-term disability, with just over 2/3 of them in that group. So again, this is 67%. So 2/3 of that 67% are going to be persons experiencing a mental health diagnosis, which is 69%. 48% have physical disability and 34% have a substance use diagnosis. So one of the questions that may come quickly is, well, those numbers don't add up to 100. And again, so you know that they're not supposed to necessarily add up to 100, because again, a person can have multiple disabling conditions at the same time. So again, so oftentimes somebody who may have a mental health condition may be quote unquote medicating that with certain substances, which also leads to the substance use diagnosis. So they would have a codependency condition there with the mental health condition and substance use, so they could fall within both categories. So now we're going to jump to the youth 18 to 24. So again, these are going to be youth who are technically adults, but they're that younger population of youth, which often they have a slightly different set of needs when it comes to service delivery than would your typical family and single adults. So we know that about youth have an average age of 21. About 50% of them are male. So you can deduce from that 50% of them are female or one of the transgender categories, or as it is. So it is probably a pretty even split there in terms of our population. We know that 41% are white, while 56% of the population are African American. And also, this is one of the big shocks of this, but the average monthly income for youth at exit is going to be $156, which by far is the lowest income amount out of any of the subpopulations we're going to be looking at here. So out of the youth population, as expected, typically they have a lower degree of long-term disability. 44% of them have one. 77% of those, just about 3/4 or over 3/4 of them have a mental health diagnosis. So we know that persons who are youth experiencing homelessness, that the primary diagnosis is actually going to be a mental health condition, where only 17% have a physical disability and 19% have a substance use diagnosis. I think one of the key things to remember about this, again, is typically when you're younger, you may not necessarily have physical disabilities to the same degree, that as you age, you get those due to the nature of what we are all experiencing called aging. And again, when you're young, you may not have the long-term life habits that have created cycles of substance use, which is something that is very common within an aging population, especially one that is dependent on substances for a much longer period of time. So both of those numbers tend to be just a little bit lower than their counterparts in the regular senior adult population or the families population.
Okay, Jerry. So we've had a couple of questions and comments come in, and we've got some question now around LGBTQ status and the youth data. In particular, is this something that's tracked for the 18 to 24-year-olds, and is it something that's provided to the youth providers directly?
This is a good question. There have been some changes made to the data collection models. Unfortunately, there's some changes right now that are taking place around the LGBTQ population, which until they get that settled down and straightened out, it is rather difficult, because one thing that some of you may know is that according to national averages, between 38 and 40% of youth who are experiencing homelessness identify as LGBTQ plus, which is obviously a significant minority of the population, something that absolutely does need to be addressed. Unfortunately, right now, with the way the data collection is happening, with the transition taking place within that, there isn't really a solid data set that we can draw from, that we can really depend on at this point, until some of that gets worked out, and then we're going to be able to begin looking at that again.
Okay, thanks, Jerry.
Oh, was there anything else, Jason?
So there's some other questions. In particular, some folks are asking for clarifying remarks around the map of the state and how it's broken up. I think at this point, let's keep going through the
Okay,
subpopulations and then we can circle
absolutely,
back afterwards. Yeah, and kind of walk folks
absolutely.
through the map again.
So unaccompanied youth, this is going to be the term that we use for those youth who are under the age of 18. So there were 711 unaccompanied youth in the count in 2000, in 2018. Out of those, 54% were female, 44% male, with two others. These are going to be some of the transgender and the non-binary categorization. The average age of them, of course, as you would assume, is going to be 18 or 15. Sorry. What you're looking at is you're looking at a measurement. The age demographic which this population is going to fall in is between the ages of 12 and 17. So the average age is 15. 43% of them have an identified disability. And again, as you would expect, the vast majority of these are going to be 70% of mental health diagnosis, basically mirrors the older youth population in that respect. 25% have a developmental disability, while 13% have a substance use issue. One thing that is really critical to talk about, because this is one of the biggest predictors of the fact that why these students become homeless, is that 1 in 4 in of the students who are experiencing some form of unaccompanied youth homeless have experience in the foster care system. So we know from a national perspective that a very strong predictive factor of whether or not somebody ends up being unaccompanied youth experiencing homelessness is their experience in the foster care system. So we know that 1 out of 4 of the youth that we count within this category actually do have some history within the foster care system. And veterans, the one thing that I do want to say about veterans is, again, veterans have been a category that we have really, as a state, tried to drive home and address in many ways. Also, from a national perspective, it has been a big priority group. And we're seeing some definite improvement in this category because of it. Just demographically, we're seeing that 90% of them are primarily male, as you might expect, especially among the older population. Because of the fact that until recent years, until the last probably 30 years or so, there were fewer women who were serving in the military. We anticipate that those numbers are going to be changing more than likely over time. But also there's an average age of 52 for persons who are experiencing homelessness who are veterans. Also, 74% have a long-term disability, with 61% mental health, 62% physical disability. So you see a huge jump in the physical disability category for persons who are experiencing homelessness who also identify as veterans, and just under 40% of them, so 38%, have a form of substance use diagnosis. Big thing, a point here, which is very important. I think that this really does reflect on the work that's been done around veterans, but the average monthly income at exit for a veteran who's experiencing homelessness is just over $1,100 a month, which is the highest number out of the subpopulations we're looking at within this breakdown. Then chronically homeless. So without diving into the crazy definition of it, which any of you in homeless services probably know it, these are basically the long stayers, the people who have repeated long-term episodes of homelessness and some form of disability would be the simplest way to phrase it. Those people who are really touching the system at a high rate with high levels of need, we find they have an average age of about 45, and 65% of those persons are male. So just over half of them are African American. About 78% have a mental health disability, 43% have a physical health disability, and 38% have a substance use diagnosis, with an average income. Again, their income amount is one of the higher ones within the subpopulation, but we're looking at about $938 a month. And then the seniors population. So This one I want to talk briefly about because this is really important. As I mentioned before, most homeless populations in the state of Michigan have experienced a decrease or are sustaining at about the same level. The seniors and families, in particular seniors here, are one of the populations where we have seen a 6% increase in between 2016 and 2018. One thing that I do want to stress, and this is based off the work by Dr. Dennis Culhane, which some of you know is one of the leading homeless researchers in the country. He predicts, due to mortality tables and demographic population tables because of the census, that the homeless population among seniors is going to be an increasing population, which is not going to peak until about 2028. So we're about 9 years away from the peaking of that population due to statistical analysis. So this population is going to become an even more pronounced group in the subpops that we're going to be serving. So out of this group, 19% are over 65 years old, which you can deduce from that 81% are going to be between the ages of 55 and 64. 77% of them have a documented disability, 59% with a mental health, 63 with a physical disability. 50% of the veteran homeless population are seniors, and 29% of the chronically homeless population are seniors. The average income at exit is about $942 a month, which again is one of the higher groupings. But one thing that I can tell you right now is seniors are one of the population that really do struggle with outcomes. We see on average much lower levels of outcomes with seniors than we do with some of the other subpopulations. And of course, that's particularly troubling, knowing the vulnerability that they experience because of some of the health conditions and other disabilities they may have. So Jason, I think this is your turn to take it away.
You wish. No, you're still on the hook here for a few more
Oh,
months,
I'm
Jerry.
still on the hook for outcomes. Okay, okay. Well, I will talk about outcomes. Yeah, I guess this is the thing that I was trying to pass off my work on Jason. Man, he doesn't like me doing that. So, well, and this is something that you've had to listen to me blabber about for quite some time, because this is really the core of some of the work that we've been doing. So we've determined that our four core measures will form the basis for how we evaluate progress in ending homelessness. So number one, reducing new episodes of homelessness and episodes just in general of homelessness. Number two, reduce the length of time persons experience homelessness. Number three, increase the percentage of discharge to stable and permanent housing and retention in permanent housing. And then number four, reduce the returns of homelessness within the system. So we've got CQI initiatives around the state designed to assist and address these outcomes. So let's take a look at this. And I know that these charts are a little bit small here, but number one, what we are seeing is, so on the first measure, number of persons who are first time homeless and without additional homeless experience in the preceding months, we are seeing in shelter and transition only population that number has gone up by about 2% over the 3-year run. However, the shelter, transitional, and permanent housing numbers have dropped by about 7%. The one thing that we do see as we jump to measure two is the total length of time homeless that persons are spending in shelter, places unfit for human habitation, or transitional housing. We're seeing that number has dropped 92 nights to 49 nights, to change of 43 nights. One thing that I do want to caution on this is likely an artifact of better measurement processes in cleaning up how we're doing the measurement of data, particularly with CQI initiatives across the state of Michigan. So this 49 does not mean we stumbled on a silver bullet to instantly figure out how to get people to spend less time in homelessness, but it probably is a more accurate measure of what people are really experiencing when it comes to length of time, because we are improving our data collection methods. So the percentage of people who are exiting to stable housing and returning to or retaining permanent housing, this is measure three. We are seeing that within street outreach from 2016 to 2018, this has gone up by 14%. We're at 66% here. Shelters, transitional rapid rehousing, we are averaging about 51% discharge, which is 5%. And then permanent housing, so this includes rapid rehousing or retention of that rapid rehousing, we are up to about 97%, which is up 2% in the state, which honestly is a very good performance number. If you're in that ballpark right there, we're doing good. And honestly, at this point, you're not going to see much of a change in that number, but maintenance of that number and keeping that high standard is going to be important. So the last one we're going to look at is number of persons who have a new homeless episode within a 2-year period after exiting to stable housing. So basically saying, do these people become homeless again in 2 years after they exit to some form of permanent housing? We're seeing that street outreach dropped by 7%, down to 21%. Shelters down to 29%, which is a drop of 3%. Transitional 18%, which is a drop of 1%. Of course, permanent housing means that they were not homeless within that window of time, so it's not applicable. But total returns, we're looking at a drop of 3%. We are down to about 23% of the population, just under a quarter, experienced a new episode of homelessness within a 2-year period after having exited to permanent housing within that 2-year period prior.
So let's just take a moment here and pause and do the whole social work thing and let folks reflect on all of that and see if, yeah, and here come the questions. That's what I was just going to say. I was kind of shocked that we hadn't
Jason
gotten
knew that was coming.
Yeah, now they're coming in. So let me start seeing what we have. So this is from Amanda Sternberg. For measure 2 length of time, it looks like you're not looking at the part of the measure that includes time in transitional housing as well. Is that correct?
That is correct. And I'm trying to go back to look at what happened with the measure. Amanda, I'll have to circle back and take a look at that. I believe we grouped them both together. We didn't separate them out. So we looked at the total length of time for both categories, which would be the second portion of it.
Okay, and
But
shocking.
I'll go back and check on that. So I don't want to commit to saying that without going back and checking out what we did with the data.
Fair enough. And shockingly, no other questions. So Amanda, thanks for asking that. Nothing else has come through yet, but we'll give folks a second. When we were talking about the map earlier, it was a few slides later that folks started, asking questions or asking for clarification about that. So we might have more things pop up here in a bit, but we can address it as it comes on.
Very good.
So now I think. Now I'm ready to get tapped in. So
good.
So thanks, Jerry, for all of that information. And of course, every year folks see the report, they participate in this webinar, and then they always ask, well, what do we really need to know about homelessness in Michigan? So this year we decided to break it into 2 categories: where have we been most successful and where have we seen the most challenges. So starting with the success, because everybody wants to hear the good news first, right? So as Jerry was saying, for a lot of the populations, or subpopulations, numbers stayed relatively static or there were minor declines. However, with veterans, we saw a 9% decrease from 2016 to 2018. And then with homeless youth ages 18 to 24, you see that there was a relatively dramatic decline between 2016 and 2018 for that population, 17%. So by far, the youth ages 18 to 24, that was the largest subpopulation decline across the board. And then the other thing we wanted to point out, and this is something we've been highlighting, help me out here, Jerry, maybe the last 3 years, 4 years, about health insurance for folks who are part of the HMIS system.
Yeah, we're really looking at since about 2014 is when we really put the big priority on looking at it.
Okay, so 4 or 5 years at this point. And 83% of the homeless population had health insurance when they were in the system, with the vast majority, 69%, having Medicaid. So as we talk about Medicaid work requirements or some of the other issues that are likely going to be coming into play here in the near future, it'll be interesting to see what kind of impact that has on these numbers. And of course, that becomes talking points as you're talking with especially when you're talking with policymakers. So something to be mindful of. Now, as I mentioned, kind of gave it away earlier, key challenges. Jerry already highlighted this in great detail. We know that African Americans are way overrepresented in the homeless population. As he said, we've the coalition and partnership with MISHDA and DHHS and Balance of State have offered trainings. Well, with Spark, the national group that's doing a lot of anti-racism work. And we've got more stuff in the pipeline coming in the next couple months. But it's an issue. We're aware of it. We're trying to address it as best we can. But at this point, it's something that we want to make sure that you, as you're engaging with policymakers or members of the media or members of the general public, are familiar with the numbers, kind of how things stack up, and that you're comfortable with talking about it. So that's why it's front and center. The other thing, and if you look at the report itself, you'll actually see that we have a page for health disparities and racial disparities. So whereas in years past, these issues were mentioned, but they were more or less bullet points mixed in with other things. And over the last 2 years, the racial disparities and the health disparities have gotten much more attention within the report itself. So as you can see, 44% of the Michigan's homeless population, now these are the overall numbers, not subpopulation. So overall, 44% of the homeless population has a diagnosed disability of some type, and that's compared to 14% of the state's general population again. So once again, you're seeing that folks who are homeless are way more likely to, not only way more likely to be African American, but they're also way more likely to have a diagnosed disability of some type. Other challenges, as Jerry mentioned, families with children, we saw a significant increase, so 17% between 2016 and 2018. And of course, we already mentioned about the 6% increase for seniors age 55 plus. And then one added piece here is 31% of the seniors experienced homelessness for the first time after age 55. So yeah, kind of frightening to think about that situation. So let's see, moving into talking points, because this is something that folks typically, well, at least the last 2 years have been asking for us to provide some type of guidance as they're going into Homeless Awareness Month, and they may have community events where they're talking about homelessness at the local community level, but then they also want to be able to talk about what's happening at the local level in the context of what's happening statewide. So, because of course, as Jerry said earlier, if you call in the national data, then it's a little bit of comparing apples and oranges, because you're looking at your local level data. You're comparing the snapshot with the PIT numbers nationally versus what we have here at the state level. So, and of course, these are just suggestions. These are not things that you definitively have to utilize. But so the first talking point, overall, there was a 2% decline between 2016 and 2018. It gets complicated if you begin to look at it beyond that, in that from 2016 to 2017, there was I believe, 9% decrease. But then from 2017 to 2018, there was actually an increase. So this is just looking at that 3-year spread and the net result of that. And that's why we didn't get into the nuance of looking at the year-to-year numbers, because that tells a bit of a different story. But if you're just looking from last year to this year, word of warning, spoiler alert, there was an increase at the statewide level. As you can see, the other talking point we put up there front and center in terms of the overall picture, because a lot of folks have been talking about the importance of health insurance, Medicaid, especially as we're going into the election coming up next year. This topic has been front and center with folks. So put the numbers out there in front of front of people, so that they get a sense of what the health insurance situation looks like for individuals who are homeless. In terms of the challenges, you see we basically mimicked with the increase in the number of families, mimicked the previous slide. One thing that we threw in here to change it up is that the 658 number, that's the aggregate for all of the people who experienced homelessness sometime during 2018. And if you're wondering where some of these numbers are coming from, it's actually in the last 2 pages of the report itself. There is a large demographic chart where it has the overall numbers, and then it has the subpopulations, and then it has veterans and the chronically homeless and seniors as well are now the 3 breakouts that make up each of the subpopulations. So if you look at that chart, that is the gold mine and the source of all this data. So if you want to get a sense of where these numbers are coming from, that's it. And so if you look at the column where it has the aggregate for the statewide numbers for last year, that's where the 658 number comes from. And as Jerry was saying when he was talking about the subpopulations, you don't have to have a PhD in economics to figure out that 658 a month is obviously going to cause issues based in any place in Michigan in terms of having to cover housing plus additional costs. So in terms of highlighting the areas where there has been success, you can see that we tap into or call out the successes around the veterans and the youth 18 to 24 and the 2 declines in those populations. So it gives you a sense of where things are going. So it looks like we had some questions, but it looks like folks were raising their hands, but it doesn't look like any questions have come in. And then the other question, and this kind of goes back to the poll questions we were asking at the very front end of the webinar, just in terms of how folks are using data and what they're kind of thinking about. And in a lot of cases, we just really want to plant seeds and make sure that you're not missing kind of low-hanging fruit or upcoming opportunities. So in particular around Homelessness Awareness Month, we're hearing, we're getting lots of invites at the MICA office now about communities planning events or a series of events throughout November, to either raise awareness for the general public or to engage with policymakers or both, or even something else. So we just want to make sure that you are thinking of, as you're organizing those events and pulling materials together, that you're thinking about the data and the ways that it can plug in and inform what you're doing. And also if you're putting together takeaways or press releases, anything like that, making sure that you're comfortable with these numbers and understand what they actually mean. And as somebody that's been in that role in the past where, been engaging with members of the media or policymakers and around the data, being able to kind of tell the story, especially if they're asking specific questions. So around different subpopulations or something like that. So just being, just having that comfort level. And then of course, this is, I think the HMIS team and the rest of the MICA staff are going to feel like a broken record at this point, but you have access to the local level data that's comparable to what's in this report. Talk to your system or agency administrator about pooling that so that you, as I said earlier, are able to compare apples and apples. And again, being able to say, okay, so this is what's happening in our backyard and this is what's happening in the state at the state level. So folks can kind of get a sense of how things are going in your community. And then last but not least, and a lot of you said that you're already using data for funders. And when we say funders here, I mean, yeah, Michigan DHHS, obviously, but we're thinking more like if you're putting grant applications together. So, being able to talk intelligently about the data, so you're not just copy and pasting stuff into a grant proposal, but you're able to tell a bit of a story about the what's happening around homelessness in our state. So questions. And of course, we've had a few questions come in. Um, so I think Jerry, if you're still around and your mic is live, we had some questions about helping to understand this map. So let's start there and then see if anything else, if this sparks any other questions or if anything else comes in the interim. So in particular, folks were asking about the numbers that are on the map itself. We've got the region, say we've got region 4, 14,985 and then 23%. Jerry, can you help folks understand what exactly those numbers represent compared to the overall state count?
Okay, so a couple of things. If you look at the little pop-up balloon bubbles in each area, what it does is it shows that within 20, so we're just looking at the map right now. The pop-up balloon shows the total number of persons who identified as category 1 within that region within 2018. And then the percentage next to it would say what percent is that number of the overall state population. So just because it's like obvious and real big at the top, like region 1, the UP, we've got 3,146 persons who are literally homeless. That would make up about 5% of the overall state population in 2018 who experienced literal homelessness.
Okay. And then the numbers at the bottom, as you said earlier, those are the annual counts for each of the regions, and then the change at the bottom, 2016 to 2018. So folks get a sense of what those percentages look like.
That would be correct.
Okay. All right. So Mitch, hopefully that answers your questions, but let us know if there was other things that you were interested in as well. And Jerry, this question hasn't come up today during the webinar, but it actually came up in the lead up to the webinar. Historically, MICA has been able to provide regional data, regional demographic data that kind of goes into the numbers that we're seeing here. Is that something that we could provide again this year?
Yeah, absolutely. And so if your community doesn't already have that information, we do have those reports available and we can make sure they get distributed to your local COC. So again, there's a couple things. If you're part of a local COC or local planning body, back in April, I believe it would have been, mid-April, we have sent you your final numbers for 2018. So at a local planning body, a local COC level, you should already have those numbers. We can also get out the regional numbers so that you can have those regional numbers, of course, having the statewide numbers as part of this annual report process. So you can have all three to be able to use those for your own advocacy work.
And who would folks contact if they're interested in getting those reports?
What I would do is I would contact directly your system admin or your COC or local planning body chair or coordinator. Those would be the people that will have that information.
Okay. And if they don't have it, they'll know how to get it, right?
Yep. I'm sure they'll figure it out pretty quickly. So yes.
Right. Okay. Perfect. So let's see. Well, no more questions have come in. So I think we're in good form, and we're also getting very close to 11 o'clock, which is when we told everybody we would be winding down. So at this point, let me say, Jerry, thank you once again for taking the time out of your schedule this week to be able to join us and walk through the report with everybody. And yeah, I think we're at the point where we can wish everybody a good rest of the day. And of course, if something comes up afterwards, everyone has my email address. If there's a question or clarification that you're looking for about the report, feel free to contact me. I can try to answer the questions, or I can loop in Jerry or other members of the HMIS team if we need to do that. So that door is always open. And as I said earlier, if anybody is had any problems with downloading the actual copy of the report or the slide deck, although again, not sure why you want the slide deck because it's all in the report itself. But I will be sending out a follow-up email probably later today, and we'll include those materials in the follow-up email, so that way folks have access to it. So with that, Jerry, thanks again. Thanks everybody for calling in and asking questions. very much appreciate your interest in the data. As Jerry said, data is only as good as much as we use it, and we can only use it if we understand it. So hope everybody has a great rest of your Thursday, and we will talk to you soon. Bye, everybody.
Hey, take care.